G'day guys and welcome, my name's Michael and I'm the Dead Aussie Gamer, here to share with you my tips, tricks, ideas and strategies for playing and running tabletop role-playing games. Now we are back with our third video and the final video actually on designing a successful encounter. The topic that we're going to be focused on is how to design an encounter's challenge level, like how difficult should it be, and of course how should we pace it once we get going. This, I think, is one of the things that many GMs struggle with in any kind of game. Because, well, let's face it, sometimes dice roll bad, sometimes dice roll good. And what is it that we need to achieve in order to get our goals through the gate, and how difficult should things be? These questions get asked to me all the time, so hopefully by showing you guys a little bit about how I manage my difficulty scale, you guys will be able to take some of that into your next GMing prep session. So let's take a look at the difficulty scale. So here are some of the things that I look at when I am determining how tough or how difficult a challenge needs to be. The first thing I look at is risk versus reward, because for me, this is what motivates my players. This is their very fundamental understanding of how this encounter should go down. If there is an incredibly high risk and a very low reward, often I'll find my players will try and circumvent it rather than trying to deal with the encounter. If there seems to be a fair trade, you'll often see that they're more inclined to try and figure out something or make it work. If the risk is minimal and the reward is great, I guarantee you they will take the most direct route and try to solve this problem. Risk and reward is what drives your players and gives them that motivation. Now, I'm going to put a little aside here, and I'm probably going to put a little aside on each of these, but the risk and reward thing, while you as a GM need to always be aware of it, you also need to be aware that what the actual risk and reward happens to be might not be the player's impression of what it is. For example, they might find that there is this scout running around in the wilderness who apparently has the ancient artifact they've been chasing. So they need to track through the woods, find this guy and capture him to learn of its whereabouts. Now, of course, this involves several days worth of travel, facing off against the wilderness creatures and the various environmental hazards. But the reward is that they gather the artifact that they require and can use it to their own advantage. While they're aware of that risk and reward, once they get to the ranger and he doesn't have it, okay, you need to kind of be prepared to deal with some backlash on that. But at the same time, it's a perfectly viable and very interesting method of designing your encounter. If you want to know more about it, have a look at like thwarting in my previous video, because that's pretty much what that is. So, risk and reward. That's the first thing we're going to look at. The next thing is real-time investment. Now this one's a great one because we need to remember that we and our players are human beings existing in the real world. We don't like thinking about it while we roleplay, but it's there. It's a whole thing. Time constraints are important to remember, and knowing how much time your players are expected to invest in an encounter help you decide when to start it and when to end it. Because ending an encounter can sometimes be the hardest thing you as a GM need to do. But you need to keep an eye on that clock and go, well, you know what? They've been trying to solve this puzzle for the last 4 hours, and they've explored one room this session. Okay, I need to bring an end to it. I need to have something happen. An explosion. Someone gets a flash of insight. Anything at all to allow them to be able to progress. So the real-time investment is always something to look at. Next is resource investment. Now, resource investment could come in any number of forms. This is what your players need to pay in order to overcome the encounter. Whether they're circumventing the encounter using a spell like Invisibility Sphere, or if they're trying to go into battle and using up their powers and resources. Whatever they spend in order to overcome an encounter is what we call the resource investment. Now, for the most part, this is pretty good. A lot of people find that the resource investment thing is pretty natural and flows rather well. Any difficulties that you as a GM may have in terms of, oh, my players are getting through things that should be very difficult for them rather easily. A lot of GMs mean by rather easily that they haven't paid enough resources to overcome the encounter. They haven't sacrificed enough hit points. They haven't used enough spells. Now, when designing an encounter, we need to remember one crucial thing, is that resource investment is only part of your equation. If your players manage to get through an encounter and spend nothing to do so, that is actually fine. In fact, that'll actually boost up the next thing that we're going to be discussed, which is morale. It plays its part, having encounters that should be difficult be easier, and likewise having encounters that should be easy be difficult. Resource investment is just something you need to keep an eye on for your major plot points. Do I want my players to fight my major boss with nothing in the tank? Do I want my players to be fatigued because they've traveled and they've been unable to sleep? Do I want my players to have all their healing spells, or maybe some of their healing spells, readily available? This is what you need to be keeping in mind. Now, sidebar on this one, and this is a very big one. So, if you take anything away from this video, take this. Do not focus on determining the difficulty of your encounter by focusing on how many hit points your players have lost. Now, it's never appropriate. Don't do it. Basically, when you get to a point where you say, hey, I'm going to call this encounter when everyone is on like less than 10 hit points. When you start playing like that, your players will figure it out. And the trust that you have built as a GM will be gone. Because they'll realize that, well, if you're only ending this encounter, or you're only getting to the point of resolution once we hit a certain amount of hit points, then the only solution they have is to sit there and take the punishment you give them until you deem it worthy for them to move on. Once they figure that out, there is no bouncing back from that. It's a huge breach in trust, and they just find that their characters become inconsequential, because it's the GM who determines whether you live or die, or whether you succeed or fail. And at the end of the day, if no matter what you do, the encounter's only going to wait for your hit points to go down, well, the fastest way to end the encounter is for you to basically just deal damage to yourself. I've had GMs like this in the past. I've coached them multiple times. Some of them have done great and evolved and become better GMs from it. Others have kind of doubled down and really not learned anything. But often you'll find at those tables lots of TPKs, lots of player deaths, because the GM wasn't counting how many hit points the players had. A whole bunch of things. And the worst, and I mean the worst one for me, because I'm I suppose a difficulty junkie. I like things being difficult. The worst thing for me is when they get to that precipice, when they find that, all right, now we've paid enough hit points, all of a sudden the miracles happen, everything falls into place, and you miraculously succeed. Now, that's cool once in a while, but if it's happening every single fight, you get to a point where you sit there. I mean, I think I was there the last time I was playing, and we were fighting a boss, and the boss had like 250 hit points. And we sat there, and she said, oh, I cast a spell. And I'm like, okay, I've got a massive to hit right now. How much do you want to bet a natural 20 on the check is coming? All right, ready? And sure enough, natural 20. It's like, oh no, she disappeared. Whatever happened? Don't get to that point with your players. Don't judge them and judge the difficulty based on hit points. Look at resources, look at what they've spent, even look at the real time investment. That's also super important, because I know for a fact that a lot of hit point resource investment GMs tend to forget that real time matters. All right, that was my sidebar. That was my big rant, and I do apologize. If you are watching this and you are one of these GMs, there is hope. Just don't do it. I mean, it's that simple. If your encounter perishes, let it perish. If it is too quick, fix it for next time. Don't, adapt to try and make things more difficult because it didn't last as long. We'll talk about that next. The last difficulty scale that you want to look at is morale. Now, I'm not talking about your character's morale. I'm talking about your player's morale. The people sitting at the table, the people who are engaging in the game. Now, these people feel things. I know, crazy, right? Your players have feelings. So when they engage in a fight that's really easy, they feel good. They feel great. They have this huge sense of accomplishment. Sometimes you want to nurture that, and you want to make them feel this way so that later on in the narrative, they feel it even more when a real challenge shows up. Alternatively, sometimes things go really poorly and things start falling down. You can't roll well on your dice. Your players are just kind of receding back into themselves as they go, what's the point? At that point, you as a GM need to adjust the difficulty. You need to make something happen so that they can gather steam and basically regroup so that they can overcome the encounter. So morale is a huge factor for your difficulty scale. Now, not one of these things should be used individually. You should use all of them to a degree for every encounter. Even the random encounters where the risk and reward might be, well, there is tons of risk and no reward because a wolf has just jumped out at you. Well, that's fine. How much real-time investment? Well, given that it's a wolf on its own, it's a lone wolf in fact, and you are 4 well-armed adventurers, well, the real-time investment, I'm not expecting to spend more than like half an hour to 40 minutes on this. What about resources? What's supposed to be spent? Well, again, given it's a wolf and supposed to be a relatively easy encounter, let's say that maybe one of the spellcasters casts an aggressive spell while all the warriors don't really spend anything. Maybe someone gets hit. And morale. Well, if they happen to beat the wolf, then they've got a really nice shiny pelt, which again goes kind of to the reward, but nice shiny pelt, and maybe it kind of helps feed them as well, so they can use the meat and prepare for the evening meal. That way they can start their camping or they start their nightly rest eating fresh wolf meat. You know, build up that feeling, build up that sense of accomplishment. All right. Once we have an understanding of the difficulty scale, the next thing we need to understand is how to pace that game so that the difficulties really shine, so that you really achieve those goals, and so that you have a good understanding of how the game and how the rhythm should be for every encounter. So for that, we now take a look at my pacing chart. Now, this is a rudimentary pacing chart that I use for most of my encounters. I know I say battle formula there, and this just works well if I use it in the context of battle, but it also works in any kind of quick action scenario, like running from an avalanche or, you know, sort of trying to catch yourself after falling down an immeasurably large hole, you know? So this is kind of the scale that I use. So starting with easy encounters. Now, for an easy encounter, you would imagine the challenge to be less than what your group should be capable of. In many games, like Pathfinder and Dungeons & Dragons, there is a challenge rating, or a CR scale, that adjusts how difficult certain monsters and creatures happen to be. An easy encounter, at least in the context of Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder, would be something that has a challenge rating less than the group. So whatever the group happens to be in terms of level 3, level 4, level 5, less than that would be an easy encounter. And they shouldn't really last more than 1 or 2 rounds. Anything longer than that, due to, say, circumstances or whatever, should be looked at, you know, kind of changing things up or maybe shifting the dynamic. Next up is our medium encounters. Now, our medium encounters are ones that are a reasonable challenge for your group. They're things that your players won't need to invest too much of their time and effort, but at the same time, it's not something that is a pushover. They will need to take the fight somewhat seriously. In terms of challenge rating, these are things that are equivalent to the group. Maybe a challenge rating higher, maybe, but nothing more than that. And they would last 2 or 3 rounds of battle or encounter. Next up is our hard challenge. Now, these are kind of your sub-bosses, your kind of little miniature kind of like, I mean, this could even be a few different encounters at this point. And it lasts for 3 or 4 rounds at this point. This is because these encounters should be utilizing a lot more, consuming a lot more resources from your group. A lot more attacks, a lot more spells, a lot more hit points. Whether it's a death by 1,000 cuts, such as a group of goblins coming and attacking the group, or one big massive ogre cleaving through large swaths of your group. A hard encounter is where you kind of want to pace it so that you don't have a hard encounter followed by a hard encounter, but more like a medium or an easy encounter, and then leading into a harder one. Lastly, we have our boss encounter. A boss encounter is usually a major plot point, something that is worth a massive investment. These ones last from about 4 to 5 rounds and really go through several pace changes throughout the course of the battle. Ideally, you want to be fighting boss battles at full strength, and this because the CR or the challenge rating of them is usually 3 or more higher than the group. This means that there is a viable chance that one of the players or more may have their character die, and they need to kind of be prepared for that, and you need to give them the best shot they can at survival. Alright, so now that I've explained the times and the CRs and stuff like that, let me go into, well, I'll explain CR a bit better for at least Pathfinder in a minute, but why do I choose these rounds? Why this specific amount of time? Well, for me, an average party or an average group is comprised of 4 players and 1 GM. During your turn, you should be spending anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes deciding what you want to do, describing your action, and then executing it through dice rolls. Now, if each 4 player takes 5 minutes, that is 20 minutes. Now, you as a GM, you may be controlling one monster, you may be controlling multiple. Let's say that arguably in the whole round, you spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes. That's about half an hour of time spent per round during these encounter sessions. So an easy encounter should take roughly half an hour to an hour to complete. Whereas a medium encounter takes about an hour to an hour and a half. Hard encounters, an hour and a half to 2 hours. And then a boss battle from 2 hours to 2.5 hours. Now, as you can imagine, when you are doing a single encounter for 2.5 hours, that is a heck of a long time. That is a point where you kind of start to grow tired, the repetition starts to sink in, you get bored, you find that, you know, by the time it even gets to your turn, it's like, well, we feel like we've made no progress. This is where pace changing comes in. Now, every encounter, I think, needs to be aware of not only the scenario's impact on the world that the players are in and the narrative story, but on the players themselves. Around 1.5 hours, around the round 3 mark, I find that players start to feel very same. You know, they start to feel as though they're not achieving anything. Round 3 is where I call the first pace change, the uplift. Something that motivates your players to push just a little further. This could be your encounter losing their footing and missing a round of combat. This could be something along the lines of a switch being pulled and the entire topography of your battlefield suddenly changes. This third round pace change gives your players an edge, an upper hand in the fight that they are undergoing. Round 5 is it's kind of like the setup to the finale. If by the 5th round you haven't finished your battle, if you're still kind of going, you want something to happen in round 5 that either A, sets your players up to end the fight, or to end the encounter, B, gives your players an opening to escape the encounter, or C, sets up a cliffhanger for the end of your session. Now, it's kind of like a cheat way to go about it, but I always say, like, you know, keep your boss battles. Longest you want to go is 5 or 6 rounds. 6 rounds is really pushing it. If you get to that point, at the end of your game, at the, you know, sort of, we are finished for the night, having a cliffhanger at that point is where you want to change the pace. And the cliffhanger can't be something like, oh, I swing down to hit you with my club, and we'll return next week to find out if I kill you. You know, it has to be something dramatic, something that changes, something that will breathe new life into the final moments of that fight. As the giant leans forward with its huge club, it swings down with both hands upon the weakened cleric. All of a sudden, the splinters explode, and on the horizon, you hear the sounds of trumpets. Leaving it on that kind of cliffhanger means that they can still look forward to a decent fight, but at the same time, they know that something is going to be different, something is going to change, and then they become reinvigorated and excited about revisiting what's going to happen in the future. So pacing, changes, all that. This is pretty much par for the course for designing your encounter and playing around with the difficulty. All right, I'm just gonna get rid of this for the time being. There we go. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about challenge ratings and difficulties for pre-existing modules and encounters. Now, if you're using a monster out of a book, chances are someone has playtested that monster, playtested that encounter, and have informed you that this is the rough level that they should be when encountering your group. Don't break free of that. I know it's very tempting because sometimes we look at our group's makeup. We may have a power builder on our group or a min-maxer who knows everything and who has built themselves a massively powerful character. Throwing an encounter and modifying it straight out the gate starts you off on a bad tangent. I call this the GM player arms race. What happens at this point is you look at your encounter and you say, I need a bugbear, but they'll kill a bugbear in a single round, and I need it to be a challenging encounter. So I'm going to give it 20 more hit points, and +2 attack, and more armor, and it's going to get a surprise round. All of these things adding up eventually get your players into the mindset, well, oh geez, everything here is incredibly difficult. My GM is clearly making things really difficult because of me. So how do I overcome these encounters? Well, I'm going to make myself tougher because that's what I need to prepare for. The difficulty of my game is like up here, so I as a player need to now bring the A game. I need to go and get better equipment. I need to go and min-max my powers even more. And then when you do that, the GM sits back and goes, well, how is he still, absolutely beating the snot out of this thing? I've increased it. All right, let's boost the CR. Let's make it 4 CRs higher and see if that helps. The arms race continues to a point where the game becomes difficult, and either the players who are not min-maxing rise to the challenge, or the GM gets to a point where they are just simply ignoring the stats and just playing out encounters on whim. These games are the shortest lived games I ever encounter. Don't be afraid to fail as a GM. It's kind of like what we do. We create encounters, we design monsters, we play things to inevitably fail, allowing our players to rise above the challenges that we present and conquer the story. Our game is over when our players die, so why would you ever want to defeat them? Embrace the natural state of your encounters. If this is the CR for the monster, leave it there for the time being. If your players defeat it super easy, then look at exploring, enhancing the monster. Give it a template, throw something in there, but do it before your game. This way, you have a steady progress, and you have a good understanding and idea of how powerful your players really are. You'll never really understand how powerful your group is if all they ever fight are your modified monstrosities. If you play your players against an equal CR encounter and it takes 2 rounds, but one guy did 90% of the damage, well, that's not really a balanced group, but it's still an appropriate encounter. It was 2 rounds, that's what they took. Fantastic. I don't need to modify things. My players are right on cue for where I need them. Alright guys, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please hit that like button, please hit that subscribe button. It's always been a true pleasure to give you guys these kinds of questions that you guys have asked me, because it means that I'm answering the questions that you guys have. So if you guys do want me to make videos about some of the stuff that you have burning in your mind, head on over to our Discord channel. The link will be in the description below, and let me know, what is it you guys want to see? What is it you guys want me to address? If this video was helpful, leave a comment below on some of the challenges that maybe I didn't get around to addressing in these videos, and I'll see if I can respond to them below. Go check us out on other social medias such as Facebook and Twitch, and of course, if you want to help support the Dead Aussie Gamer, head on over to our Patreon, and for as little as a couple of dollars a month, you can really help make all the difference in keeping this channel growing and alive. Thank you so much, guys. Until the next time we talk, game hard or die trying. See you later.